When Shaquille O'Neal reached the front entrance of Callaway's Supper Club on the corner of Peachtree and 6th in Atlanta, Georgia, on the night of November 9, 2018, his hand never touched the door. A forearm got there first. The forearm belonged to a man named Troy Simmons, 6'1", 230 pounds, black polo shirt, earpiece in, clipboard in the other hand, who had planted himself across the entrance the way men plant themselves when they have decided something before they have fully looked at who is standing in front of them. The air smelled like cedar smoke and frying onions and the particular warmth of a restaurant at full Friday capacity. Shaq was wearing a navy blue tracksuit, clean white sneakers, no watch, no rings. 4 championships, 17 all-star appearances, a business portfolio past $400 million. He looked at the forearm. He looked at the man attached to it. "Name," Troy said, flat, mechanical, the way a man is when the decision has already been made and the words are just procedure. Shaq gave it. Troy ran his finger down the clipboard, looked up. "Not here." Shaq put both hands in his pockets, leaned back on his heels very slightly, and said nothing at all. The door stayed closed. 3 things registered on the way up that block that Shaq had not mentioned to anyone. The first was the sign above the door. Callaway's Supper Club, a stand 2009, with the apostrophe replaced by a small printed sticker, slightly off-center, like someone had fixed it in a hurry and never come back to level it. The second was a photograph in the front window, half hidden by the hostess stand, old, black and white, a man and a woman standing in front of what looked like a much smaller version of this same building. The woman was holding something Shaq could not quite make out. The third was a child's red sneaker. Just one, a size 4 at most, sitting upright on the low ledge beside the entrance, laces still tied. Placed, not dropped. Shaq looked at it for a moment, filed it, said nothing. Now here is what nobody standing outside that door understood yet. There was a reason Shaq had come to this specific restaurant on this specific Friday night, and it had nothing to do with the reservation that was, or wasn't, on Troy's clipboard. He had been carrying what he knew about Callaway's Supper Club for almost 2 years. The man whose name was on that sign had absolutely no idea that Shaq had been looking for him. Looking the way you look for something you owe someone rather than something you are owed. What happened on the other side of that door over the next hour is the kind of story that doesn't get told loudly, because the people at the center of it are not people who speak loudly. Stay with us for the entire video, because the moment the owner of this restaurant comes through that door, you are going to understand something about grace that most people spend their whole lives looking for and never find standing this close. Shaquille Rashawn O'Neal was born in Newark, New Jersey on March 6, 1972, in a part of that city where ambition was infrastructure. You built it underneath yourself before you built anything else. His mother, Lucille O'Neal, stood 5'2" and contained more resolve than most buildings. She had mastered the art of making a small thing feel like plenty, and a hard thing feel like practice. She had a rule, she said so often, it became the weather inside their apartment. When someone helps you up, you don't forget the hand. You go back and you hold it. She said it at the dinner table. She said it the morning he left for LSU, standing in the parking lot with her arms crossed against the cold, quietly enough that he almost missed it. He did not miss it. His stepfather, Philip Harrison, whom Shaq called Coach in the private filing system of his memory, believed that how you walked into a room told everyone in it everything they needed to know before you opened your mouth. "The man who needs the room to know he's there," Philip said once, not looking up from his newspaper, "has already lost something." Shaq was 12. He turned that sentence over for years before it opened. Philip had been gone for 9 years by the time Shaq stood on that sidewalk. But he was there, in the way Shaq's hands stayed in his pockets, in the way his face did not change when the forearm came up, in every room where Shaq has ever stood completely still and let the world catch up to him. Troy Simmons had not always been the man at the door. Troy was 41 and had grown up in Decatur, 15 minutes east, in a household that ran on discipline and not much else. He had wanted, specifically and clearly, to be a detective. He had applied to the Atlanta Police Department at 22, passed the written exam, made it through 2 rounds of interviews, and been passed over. Once for reasons he was given, once for reasons he was not. He applied again at 25, again at 28. He worked private security because it was available, and because it used the same instincts, even if not the same way. He was good at his job. He was also, by November of 2018, in the 37th month of a custody arrangement that required him to be present for his daughter Imani 3 weekends a month, and he had missed the last 2. The call that afternoon had not gone well. He arrived at Callaway's at 6 o'clock with the specific interior weather of a man doing math he cannot make balance. He was not cruel. He was not a bad man. He was a man in the middle of a long Friday who had decided, quickly, automatically, the way we decide things when we are tired, that the very large man in the very plain tracksuit, who had not called ahead, did not need to be his problem tonight. He would think about that decision for a long time afterward. Not with guilt, exactly, with the more instructive feeling of a man who has been shown, without cruelty, that the shortcut he took had a cost he hadn't read the sign for. Inside, Callaway's was running at the beautiful chaos of full Friday service. The restaurant seated 84 people and had a waiting list on weekend nights that the hostess, Brianna, 26, 2 semesters from finishing her nursing degree, picking up shifts to cover the gap, managed with a warmth that made the wait feel shorter than it was. At table 11, a retired schoolteacher named Evelyn Marsh was eating catfish alone, which she did every Friday, watching the room with the patient attention of someone who spent 40 years reading 30 children at once and never lost the skill. She had been watching the front entrance since the moment she'd seen the large man in the tracksuit stopped at the door. Her expression had not changed, except for a slight tightening around her eyes. At the back, partially visible through the kitchen pass-through, a man named James Callaway was plating a dessert with the focused care he gave every plate. James had built this restaurant from $40,000, a used commercial range, and the recipe book his mother left him, handwritten, spiral-bound, held together with a strip of silver duct tape, because the original binding had given out in 1987, and nobody had ever replaced it. He was 59 years old and had never been on television. He did not know that Shaq was outside. He did not know that Brianna, who had seen what happened at the door and felt it land in her stomach the way wrong things land, had taken out her phone. Within 4 minutes of Shaq's arrival at the door, Troy had found another couple's name immediately on the clipboard and waved them through with a small, apologetic smile. Evelyn Marsh set down her fork, picked up her glass of sweet tea, said to no one, because no one was sitting with her, "Lord." Just that one word. Recognition does not travel the same speed in every room. In a place like Callaway's, on a Friday night, it travels slower. It arrived first at table 6, where a man named Darius, 33, wearing his Atlanta Hawks jersey to dinner because his wife had long stopped fighting it, stood up so abruptly his chair made a sound on the hardwood that cut through the music. His wife put a hand on his arm. He sat back down. He did not stop looking at the door. Then it moved, table to table, heads turning, a pause in the ambient sound. Brianna had gone very still behind the hostess stand, looking at her phone, then up at Troy. Something had shifted in Troy's face. Not quite recognition, not quite dread, but living in the neighborhood of both. He looked back at the door. Shaq was still there, same position, the expression of a man who has timed harder things than this. You are going to have to wait just a little longer, because what comes next only makes sense when you understand what James Calloway's mother's recipe book has to do with a high school gymnasium in Newark in 1988. And nobody in that restaurant knew that part yet. Nobody except Shaq. Brianna did not go through Troy. She went around him, pushed the door open herself and said quietly, "Mr. O'Neill, I am so sorry, please come in." The room was fully aware now. Nobody moved quickly. Nobody made noise. The stillness that falls over a room when it understands that something real is happening. Not a scene, something actual, had settled over Calloway's like a drop in pressure before weather. Shaq walked in. He walked past Troy without looking at him, which was its own kind of statement. He followed Brianna toward the back. And then James Calloway came through the kitchen door, not running exactly, but moving with a speed his staff had never seen from him, because James Calloway moved through his restaurant the way someone moves through a space they love, which is slowly and with attention. He stopped 8 feet from Shaq. For a moment he said nothing. Then, "You came." 2 words, said the way you say something you have been waiting to say long enough that the saying of it feels larger than the words. Something loosened in Shaq's face, not his expression, but something behind it. "Your mother wrote to mine," Shaq said, "in 1988, when I was 16. James nodded. "She told me." "She told me too," Shaq said, 30 years later, from a hospital bed. The string of bells above the kitchen pass-through were the only sound in the room. "Your mother fed me, for 6 weeks, after the fire on Grafton Avenue, every night. She never told anyone. She never asked for anything." James Calloway's jaw moved. His eyes had gone bright. "She never told me that part." "Which part?" "That it was you." Now the convergence arrived, slow and total, the way true things arrive, not like a thunderclap, but like finally understanding a sentence you read years ago. May Calloway had been 61 in the winter of 1988, a woman who cooked for neighbors as instinctively as she breathed. After an electrical fire took out 2 floors of the Grafton Avenue building, she had fed 12 families for 6 weeks. She never learned most of their names. She kept a column of hash marks in the back of her spiral-bound recipe book, 1 per household, per night, because she counted to make sure she missed no one, and stopped counting anything else about it. One of those households had included a 16-year-old boy who would become something, though May had not known that. She had just seen a boy who was hungry and whose mother was working nights, and she had left food at the door. Shaq had carried that for 30 years. Lucille had told him the story on a Tuesday afternoon from a hospital bed in Orlando, holding his hand, and then said, because she was who she was, "When someone helps you up, you don't forget the hand. You go back and you hold it." He had found James Calloway in 4 months. May had died in 2014, and James was not a man who made himself easy to find, which Shaq had respected. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and removed an envelope. James did not take it immediately. "What is this?" "Your mother's recipe book needs a new spine," Shaq said. "That's for a new one. And a culinary foundation in her name, if you'll let it carry hers. Administered by whoever you choose." James took the envelope with both hands, the way you hold something you understand the full weight of. "She would have said you didn't have to do this." "I know," Shaq said. "She would have been right." A pause. "And she also would have made sure I did it anyway." James laughed, short, genuine, slightly undone, then pressed his lips together. "You're going to eat tonight," he said. "It was not a question. I was hoping you'd let me eat in the kitchen." James put a hand on his arm, not performed warmth, but the quiet certain grip of someone found by something they didn't know they were waiting for. He walked back toward the kitchen. Shaq followed. On the way past the hostess stand, he paused at Troy Simmons, who had gone very still and very small in the way a large man becomes small when a mistake has finished making itself clear. Shaq reached into his other pocket and produced a plain white card. Detective Exam Prep Course. My guy runs it out of Buckhead. He held it out. Troy took it, opened his mouth. Shaq shook his head once, gently. "Don't be loud about what you're going to do," he said. He walked into the kitchen. Brianna told the story for months. Evelyn Marsh told it longer, because retired school teachers know which things are worth preserving. James Calloway told it once, to his staff, in the kitchen the following Monday morning. And then he put May's recipe book on the shelf behind the pass-through, where the whole kitchen could see it while they worked. He had the spine repaired by a bookbinder in Midtown, who finished it in 3 days and charged less than she should have and refused the difference. Troy Simmons enrolled in the course and took the exam the following April. The May Calloway Culinary Foundation made its first 2 grants in fall of 2019 to young people from Atlanta and Newark, respectively. Neither press release mentioned Shaq by name because he had asked for that specifically, and James Calloway was a man who honored specific requests. Lucille O'Neill found out about the foundation 6 weeks after the announcement from a phone call she did not expect, and she sat in her kitchen for a while before she said anything. And what she said was what she had always said, not because it was performance, but because it was simply true. When someone helps you up, you don't forget the hand. In a kitchen on Peachtree and 6th, her son was eating the best catfish of his life, and James Calloway was standing at the stove the way his mother had stood at every stove she was ever given. And the recipe book on the shelf behind them was finally holding together the way it always should have. You go back, and you hold it. He never forgot, and neither should you. Drop a comment and tell us about someone in your life who fed people quietly and never once asked to be remembered for it. We read every single one. If this story reached something in you, give it a like, because May Calloway deserves that and more. This community exists for exactly these stories, the ones that happened without cameras, without press releases, without anyone keeping score. Subscribe and be part of that. The next one is already waiting, and you are going to want to be here. We will see you there.